And we have to realize there is no right way to communicate. There are better ways and worse ways, but no one right way. So focus both on mindset and messaging. And if you focus on those two pieces, we can release and reduce that pressure that many of us feel.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I am your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. And if you're on YouTube, hello, I can see you. I'm waving. And I would love to have you. If you're listening on your podcast player, you can also subscribe on YouTube and watch today's guest, Matt Abrahams, and I talking, and it's really a great conversation. I'm excited to present this to you because I think it's a skill that everybody needs, and certainly as somebody who talks for a living, this is a really interesting topic for me to just be a learner in. So I know you're going to get a lot from this, but subscribe to the show on your podcast player and also subscribe on YouTube at Keys to the Shop, hit the notification bell and all that fun stuff. But yeah, this episode is brought to you by the wonderful folks over at Ground Control. You can find more information about Ground Control over at groundcontrol.coffee. And it's also brought to us by the folks over at the Barista series from Pacific, the line of plant-based performance beverages that is just the standard for coffee professionals around the world. But more on our sponsors later on in the episode. Today, before we get started, I do want to let you know that Keys to the Shop is not just a podcast show. This is also a consulting and coaching company. Keys to the Shop works with operators all over the world to help them elevate their operations, their people, and their quality, and help operators to have a better quality of life themselves. And so I really want to offer to you, to welcome you to have a conversation with Keys to the Shop. And let's see if working with myself as your coach, as your consultant, is the right fit for you. You can email Chris at keystotheshop.com. And then we'll just set up a free discovery call and just kind of get to the bottom of what it is you need right now in this moment, whether that's on-site assessment of your cafe or one-on-one coaching for yourself or your team through a variety of issues that will help you become better and to thrive as a business. This is what drives me. It's what drives the show. And I'm excited to get to talk to you. So reach out, Chris at keystotheshop.com. And also, you might have heard me talking about these key holder coaching groups. And we've been through 2 seasons now of key holder coaching groups. These are mastermind groups of coffee shop owners who have been in business for a little bit and have a lot to share and want to also gain from the insights of others as we work together over the course of 6-month periods of 2-hour phone calls and Zoom sessions. We get together and we help solve problems. We help give insights to one another. I am hosting these groups and it has been transformational. So I really feel like you would get a lot out of this. I would invite you to apply today. You can find the link in the show notes. You can also just email me, Chris at keystotheshop.com. If you want to join a growing community of coffee shop owners who are dedicated to one another's success in a structured format that really moves the needle on your biggest goals to build a successful coffee shop and enjoy yourself while doing it. That's what key holder coaching groups are all about. So go ahead and email Chris at keystotheshop.com or follow the link in the show notes also and in the description below for YouTube listeners to sign up or to put in the application for this mastermind group, key holder coaching groups. Now, today I'm really excited to welcome to the show one Matt Abrahams. So Matt Abrahams is a passionate, collaborative, and innovative educator. He's an author, a podcast host, and a coach. He is the Larsen Lam Family Lecturer in Organizational Behavior at Stanford University at their Graduate School of Business, where he teaches 2 very popular classes in strategic communication and effective virtual presenting. He has received the Stanford GSB's Alumni Teaching Award, and which is in recognition of his valued service to teaching Stanford alumni around the world. Now, in addition to teaching, Matt is a much sought after keynote speaker and communication consultant for Fortune 100 companies. And his online talks garner millions of views, and he hosts his own popular award winning GSB podcast called Think Fast, Talk Smart, which is also the title of his really popular and really amazing book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. This is all about teaching you how to be articulate and effective in your communication in the moment. And that's the subject of our conversation today with Matt Abrahams. And this is one of those things that, at first when you're thinking about, well, do I need to learn so specifically how to articulate and speak well in these little micro moments during life? Well, I would argue that that's probably the most important part of what you do on the floor in the coffee shop. The amount of communication that gets done throughout the day, working side by side with your peers, that is what creates the culture. That is what creates people's impression of you and the values you stand for. And if you can articulate those things well and be effective in not only your messaging, but motivating people, in inspiring them and giving them the tools and resources through your words that they need to actually do the job well, then you win. But there is a technique to this. There's a lot of things to overcome. And so one of the things we talk about throughout this conversation is, the importance of spontaneous communication, what kind of pressure we put on ourselves and how it's not necessarily very helpful, and what to do about it. We talk about how average or kind of mediocre is something to be embraced when it comes to communication. And Matt explains a little bit more about that as we talk. And we just give some clear frameworks for how you can take the next step to be better at communicating when called upon to do so, when you're not necessarily prepared for it. But this is kind of like you're preparing to be on the spot. And when you're not prepared, you actually will be at the end of this conversation. So I'm excited to present this conversation about speaking on the spot and how to do it well with the author of Think Faster, Talk Smarter, Matt Abrahams. All right, Matt Abrahams, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Yeah, me too. And I just love the conversation around communication. It's, the irony of communicating about communication is not lost on me. We talk about it a lot on the show and in professional circles, but specifically the way that you have done this in your book, talking about impromptu communication, really
Mhm.
resonates with me as somebody who's been in the coffee industry for quite a long time. You work elbow to elbow with people, and you need to get the message across often in short order, but effectively. And I don't think we understand or appreciate how often that actually happens. And so I'm excited to dive into this today. I suppose a great place to start would be, how did you personally zero in on the importance of this kind of communication in everyday life and in business?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, most of our communication is spontaneous. It happens in the moment. People ask you questions, ask you for feedback. You make a mistake, you have to fix it. You're making small talk. All of that is spontaneous, and yet we rarely get any training on it. So I've had a confluence of things that made this important to me. One, with the last name Abrahams, I have always gone first in my schooling. I always knew where I would sit, and I was always called on first. So I have always had to experience this spontaneous moment. In fact, many of my friends in high school were very grateful that their names came later in the alphabet. Now, as somebody who teaches and coaches communication for decades, one of the things that became very clear is that my students and the people I coach, when going through a formal training on planned presenting, they would feel pretty comfortable. But then they would come back to me and say, I can give a presentation, I can run a meeting, no problem. But when I get questions or people ask me for feedback or I'm put on the spot, it's really hard. So both my personal experience and what I was seeing in the students and the people I coach led me to really do a deep dive into this several years ago.
What is hard about it? I mean, heard probably so many thousands of different testimonials from people and your own
Mhm.
experience. What strikes you as the most common thing that's difficult for people about this in the moment communication?
Yeah, the pressure we put on ourselves to respond and to do it right, whatever that right
Mm.
is, we put a tremendous amount of pressure on ourselves to do it right, and we want to do it quickly. And we can disabuse ourselves of that. There's no urgency. It's okay to take a moment and say, "Let me think about it." Or you can paraphrase what the person is asking you to do, or you can ask a clarifying question. So we can slow it down to take some of that pressure off. And we have to realize there is no right way to communicate. There are better ways and worse ways, but no one right way. So, part of my whole methodology and the approach I teach my students, and I encourage your listeners, is to focus both on mindset and messaging. And if you focus on those two pieces, we can release and reduce that pressure that many of us feel.
It's in the moment, but it also feels like just like a performance. There is a lot of preparation that happens beforehand. That
Mm.
you're talking about mindset as a way to approach just your everyday life, because I guess you never know when you're going to be called upon to communicate. That's why you're not prepared, quote unquote, for it. So, what kind of preparation are you thinking that we need to be doing when we enter into our work? Like, I open the door to the cafe, I walk in. What should I
Mhm.
have been mentally preparing for that's going to make me better at this?
Right. So the first thing that's counterintuitive is you can prepare to be spontaneous. That sounds strange, right? But in fact, if you think about it, athletes do this all the time. They do a bunch of drills, they do a bunch of planning, and then when they're in the moment, they're able to be agile. So this notion of preparing to be spontaneous is something we all can do. If I mean, I own my own consulting practice. I think lots of people are entrepreneurs. They work in certain roles where they know spontaneous activity will happen. First and foremost, think about what kind of things might come up. So, for example, as we are recording this, there is a political election going on. It is likely in a cafe, a coffee shop, that people might talk about politics. So, you can think about in advance, how much do I want to share about my position? What is my position? What's appropriate to share as the owner of an establishment with those who come in? So I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I can set up and think about some of the boundaries I might set for myself or expect from others. So, this notion of thinking through what might happen can prepare you, just like an athlete does some drills in a certain scenario to prepare them. Also, thinking about what is really important to you and prioritizing that, and thinking about what might be important to those in your establishment. As somebody who owns a coffee shop, certainly there are people who are regulars and there are people who are coming by. What might the regulars be thinking? So there's a fair amount of work that you can do. It doesn't take a lot of time, but just even a little bit of time can be really helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's this listening component where we had Oscar Trimbley on the show of deep
Mhm.
listening, and
Yes.
this message of, are you listening to what they're saying and what they're not saying with their body language? For example, I imagine listening is this there's just a really huge part about being able to speak impromptu.
First, Oscar is fantastic. I know Oscar. He was on my podcast that I host. I've gotten to know him, and he is one of the most insightful thinkers about listening that I am aware of. So that's great that you've talked to him, and I really appreciate his work. Yes, listening is a critical component of all communication. I have a 6-step methodology I teach my MBA students, that I teach others. The first 4 steps are about mindset, and the last of those 4 steps is about listening. And
Mm.
you're exactly right. We have to listen not only for what is said, but how it is said, where it is said, the context in which it is said. We have to listen for the bottom line, not the top line. The reality is this, and Oscar, I'm sure, shared this, is that we're not very good at listening. We listen just enough to get the gist of what somebody is saying, and then we get into our own heads, planning our responses, judging what was said. It is critical to be present and to listen deeply. I use an example for spontaneous speaking. Imagine you and I come out of a meeting and you say to me, Matt, how do you think that went? And I hear, oh, feedback. He wants feedback. So I start itemizing all of the things that went wrong, all the things we could have done better. But had I really listened, deeply listened, I might have noticed you came out the back door, not the front door like I did. You were looking down. Your tone was more muted. What you were really asking for in that moment was not support. was not for feedback. You were actually asking for support. And I, by delineating all of the things that you did wrong, actually actively work against that. So listening is super important. And I encourage everybody to really focus on their listening. Now, I say this with a smile on my face because my wife is constantly telling me I still need to continue to improve my listening. So it's something we can all continue to work on.
There is a bit at stake here, and it's a bit of a tension that I see in coffee, and I'm sure in other business it's the same,
Hmm.
where I have a self-preservation instinct. And then
Hmm.
at the same time, I'm supposed to be serving other people, and I want them to persevere and preserve themselves. So I imagine a lot of the impulse that we have for creating these defense mechanisms of just not thinking first, but just acting to get the communication done, but not done well. There must be some kind of just a primal self-preservation instinct that causes us to shut down the efficacy of our communication.
Wow, I love that. That's a really deep thought, and it gets to the evolutionary nature. A lot of us who study this believe that these fears and these concerns we have about communication are ingrained in us as humans. And I think you're right. I think that there is this those of us who study this believe that the biggest driver of our anxiety and concern about communication is our primal need to have status within an organization. When we get together, as our species evolved, we would hang out in groups of about 150, and your relative status, and when I say status, I'm not like saying who drives the fancy car or who has the most social media
Yeah.
followers. I'm saying status in terms of who got access to resources, in terms of shelter and food, reproduction. And that's ingrained in us. And so anything we do that puts our status at risk makes us nervous and concerned. So many of us respond in exactly the way that you said. Even though this is built into us, those of us who study it believe we can absolutely manage it and work to improve it. So it doesn't just always have to be that way. But you ask a really insightful question, and there are things that we can do to learn to manage and address the issues.
So managing and addressing this, what I suppose would be a fear of exposure, a fear of being ostracized, and um,
Or being made fun of in a way that puts us in a bad light, that would stick with us, our reputation. That's why reputation and reputation management is so important to us as humans.
yeah, I mean, because we're building our reputation, and anytime we open our mouth and we make
Mhm.
it do an action at work,
Or
people are
we
seeing
don't
that.
do an action. That's the other thing, is that if you don't do something, that can also get you in trouble.
Yeah, because people have expectations of you by dint of your role, that
Mhm.
you are going to do this because you are an owner, you are a manager, and managers do these things. Now, if you don't do those, and or you do what they want you to, but not in the way that they want you to, there's a lot of interpretation. So it's almost paralyzing when you're in that role to reach out past where you're comfortable, because it feels, I mean, it just kind of feels like death, honestly.
It does. I mean, it can feel that significant. There's that famous quote by Jerry Seinfeld, his joke that people are so afraid of speaking in public that at a funeral they'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. And
Yes.
while that's funny, it actually is based on reality that many of us feel those pains, and yet great things can happen when you move out of that comfort zone. You can connect with people, you can learn, you can expand your knowledge. For an owner of a coffee shop, you can expand your brand. So there's a lot of benefit of learning how to manage these circumstances, but
Hmm.
it does require that initial step into it.
How have you seen this play out with your students, for example, and people that you've coached and consulted that have started in this more of a uh, I don't really want to do this. I'm not good at it. I have imposter syndrome. I'd rather just plan the meeting, go through my bullet points. I don't want to do impromptu. To being confident and maybe authentic and vulnerable, but effective. How have you seen that play out?
Yeah, so I do a lot of work with people and students to help them feel more comfortable and confident. So I walk them through a series of steps, and while there are 6 steps, any one step will help. But it first starts with managing anxiety. Many of us are nervous in these circumstances, and there are things we can do to manage that anxiety. We can manage the symptoms, like what happens to us, our rapid breath, our shakiness. We can also manage some of the sources of anxiety. I already mentioned one, reminding ourselves that there is no perfect right way to communicate. In fact, it's better to focus on connecting rather than perfecting what we say. We also need to really reframe these circumstances, these spontaneous speaking situations, not as threats, but as opportunities. When somebody asks me a question, I can say, "Oh my goodness, they're challenging my expertise," or I could say, "This is an opportunity really to understand the other person, to share my thoughts, to learn from them." So that reframe can be important. And then we talked about listening, and there are lots of things we can do to listen better. A lot of it has to do with just being present and prioritizing the other person over ourselves. And then, and I hope we get to this in a little bit, there's the whole messaging part. So how do we craft messages? There are actually recipes, if you will, frameworks, structures that can help us get through. It's like a roadmap. It's hard to be lost if you have a map. And these structures, recipes, frameworks actually help give that map. And then the last thing we have to really work on is being concise. Many of us say more than we need to when we're nervous or when we're speaking spontaneously. We take our audiences on a journey of our discovery of what we're saying, which is not always as clear or crisp as it could or should be. So there is a lot that we can do. And following a methodology, giving yourself permission to take those risks, really seeing these things as the benefits they can bring, can help fundamentally change. And I have seen it happen, not just with one or two people, but literally thousands of people have become more comfortable and confident speaking in the moment by going through steps such as these.
Hey everyone, Chris here, and I just wanted to give you a little bit more information about our sponsors today. Couldn't do this show without them, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about, first of all, the folks over at Ground Control. Ground Control has been making this machine, the Ground Control Brewer, for many years now. The original Cyclops Brewer was a hit across the world. They have unlocked the potential of coffee with their SCA award-winning technology. The new edition of this brewer is smaller than the first, so it fits in more places in your shop, but it has 30% higher output of batch espresso concentrate as well as the cold brew concentrate, which is what the machine is really known for, along with elevating batch brew coffee quality. So it's a workhorse of a machine. It's very versatile, and I would encourage you to check it out if you're looking for this kind of a level up in your operations. Again, you can go over to groundcontrol.coffee to learn more, have a chat with them, and see if this is the right thing for your cafe. Many people have adopted this and are just loving it, and so are their customers. Again, that's over at groundcontrol.coffee. Now, I also want to talk a little bit here about the Barista Series. Now, I've been working with the Barista Series for quite a long time, and so has the industry. You know, the cornerstone of plant-based beverages for baristas for a long time has been the Barista Series. And it's because it is created for baristas. It is tested by great baristas before it even reaches your shelves. So some of the standouts is that it does stand up to the heat from steaming. It produces amazing texture for latte art, and it also keeps the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee. That's important. Your customers are going to love the intentionality that was put into this development, because this is one of those, the plant-based beverage market is only getting more popular. So making good choices about how you source your ingredients for your lattes, your cappuccinos, mochas, etc., is paramount. So go to pacificfoodservice.com and check them out there and get samples. Try it, steam it, taste it, see how your baristas like it. I think you all are going to be very impressed. So wonderful people at the Barista Series, wonderful product. Again, pacificfoodservice.com. And if you're looking for the best plant-based beverages for your customers, then I think it needs to be the Barista Series from Pacific. So now back to our conversation on thinking fast and talking smart with Matt Abrahams. Let's get into it then, because messaging is really at the heart of why we're communicating. We want to put a message out there. So what does it take to have good messaging in the moment?
Yeah, so several things. One, it's really important to know or think about who you're speaking to, because relevance is critical. If I can make something relevant and salient for you, important for you, one, you're more likely to listen and engage. And two, it helps me focus my message, so I'm less likely to be rambling and verbose. So first we have to think about what's important to this person. And once I have an understanding of what's important to the person, I then have to think to myself, what is it that I want to get across? Not just the information, but also how do I want the person to feel and what do I want them to do? So I believe all communication, planned or spontaneous, must be goal driven. And a goal has three parts: information, emotion, and action. You
Mm.
should ask yourself, even if I'm just walking into a room where I know there's going to be chit chat or small talk, I might say to myself, what's important for these people in the room, or what's important for me to get across? What do I want them to know? How do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do as a result of this communication? So that focusing and prioritizing sets you up. And then, instead of just listing out information, our brains are not wired for lists. I challenge you to think about, how many items do you need to buy at the grocery store before you have to write them down so you don't forget? For me, it's three. Anything over
Yeah,
three, I'm going to forget. We're
sure.
not good with lists. What we are good with is story. And story is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So having structure and frameworks can help. And I'll give you just one that I think is really powerful, and I'm happy to talk about others. My favorite structure is three simple questions: what, so what, now what?
Mm.
What, so what, now what? What is your idea, your position, your update, your feedback? The so what is why it is important to the person you're talking to. And the now what is what comes next. Maybe it's, let me give you a demonstration, or let me take your questions, or let's set up another meeting. So I'll give you an example. Imagine, as a coffee shop owner, you have a new promotion, maybe a new type of coffee, maybe a new promotion. If you were to articulate this in a spontaneous way, if somebody said, hey, what's new? You would say, what? That's the new promotion. So what? Here's why it's important. The new coffee, the new brand. And the now what might be, try some or come back next week when it's in full force. So just by answering the questions, what, so what, now what, you give yourself a path, a recipe to follow. And that makes it easier, because whenever you have to communicate, you have to focus on what to say and how to say it. The structure tells you how. I'm a lousy cook, but if I follow a recipe, I'm more likely to cook a better meal. So too by following a framework. So structuring a message, first thinking about your audience and what's relevant, having a goal, know, feel, do, and then leveraging a structure really helps you be effective both in planned and spontaneous speaking.
So what, so what, now what? That helps you, gives you, it's like bumper bowling. I'm going to hit a pin, right?
Absolutely. No, in many ways, you're exactly right. It's those bumper guards.
Yeah, and that's good. I feel that makes me a more secure as a speaker. And then what does it do for the hearer, the person being communicated to?
I love that you're asking this question, because communication is two-way. There's a sender and a receiver. When information is packaged up clearly and concisely, it makes it so much easier for me to understand. Again, we're not good with lists, but we are good with structures. Human beings are storytelling and story receiving machines. When I tell you a story, your brain and my brain actually sync up. Our brain waves look the same, so much so that you can't even tell who is the teller of the story and who is the recipient of the story. It's called
Mm.
cognitive entrainment. So what's happening for you is we are connecting. I'm speaking to you in a way that you are designed to hear me, that is through story, through structure. And because it's packaged clearly and concisely, you are able to digest it more easily. And here's the benefit: this all increases accuracy of transmission. Ultimately, the goal of most communication is for me to get my ideas clearly to you. And if I package it up nicely, you in turn could then relay that information. We have all played that game of telephone as kids, where I say something to you, you send somebody else, somebody else, somebody, and by the time it gets back to me, it's a totally different message.
Yeah.
By leveraging structure, it increases the F word of communication, not that naughty one, but fidelity, accuracy, and clarity. So it's helpful both to me, but it's really helpful to the person who receives it as well.
And I imagine the accuracy of what we're communicating, or the intentionality we put behind it, is toward a goal that we've already determined is important to the moment, but ultimately serves the higher purpose of the organization, your values. And what, to what degree do your foundational values and ultimate like mission of business or operation play in what you're saying and how you're saying it?
Absolutely. And it allows you to reinforce it. I mean, think of it this way. Those values you have are the ingredients you put into the recipe, but having the recipe allows you to focus more on the ingredients. So, yes. So, one of the things I might do is, as an owner of a small business, is I might say, these values are really important to me. And here are some stories that represent those values, or here are some testimonials from customers or others that really represent those values. So when I'm actually in the moment being asked a question or asked to share my opinion, and I have to do it on the spot, I've already thought about those stories, those testimonials, and I can just pull them in and put them into that recipe, that structure to add extra support. So again, just like an athlete doing drills, in that moment, I know I can rely on the things I've pre-thought about to help me get through it. And people often say, but then that's not authentic, is it? And I would argue actually it allows you to be even more authentic because you are present. You're not inside your head worrying about what I'm saying, how am I saying it, am I saying it right? You're just there doing it. And that can allow you to connect more deeply.
Matt, you read my mind because that was that was my next question. Basically, is we value authenticity almost as a pendulum swing in the direction away from what we believe is corporate speak, dry, black and white. We want color, we want texture and warmth, and so to us that feels vulnerable and authentic. And to plan, to be intentional, feels as though it's stifling. And what you're saying is that it's not so much that it's stifling, it's more that you're giving yourself more to choose from in the moments that you do want to be more authentic. Explain to us a little bit more how that works, because it still feels like maybe I could be too obsessed with the technique that you're
Mhm.
talking about and not be in the moment.
Right. So there is absolutely a transition period where we have to do a lot of work and it has to become comfortable for us. If anybody's ever learned a foreign language, a musical instrument, a new sport, there's this transition period where we actually have to work pretty hard before it becomes natural. But it is in that process that we really learn a lot about ourselves, and it allows us to be more authentic and to be more present. But at first, it can feel a little clumsy and awkward, just like any new skill we take on.
Mm,
But I firmly believe, I see it in my own life, I see it in the lives of my students, the people I coach, that when you become comfortable leveraging structure and this mindset approach that I talk about, you can be more present and you can be more connected. And it just takes a little bit of time and grace, giving yourself permission to try it out, to make mistakes, to know it's going to feel uncomfortable. But that's the way we learn.
yeah. And in the consulting that I do with coffee shop owners, for example, when we talk about consistency, we talk about service and how often it's the unexpected arrival of groups of people in the coffee shop that really throw us. Like, we're not
Mhm.
expecting it. The numbers don't show it. We were studying our numbers and we're not expecting this thing. And those are the moments where we really shine, and or we drop the ball because we're not prepared. Our reputation is based on these moments that sometimes are not predicted or not
Mhm.
predictable, I suppose. But we did plan for them means we're going to actually build a better reputation because all eyes are on us. The bigger and the rush of people, the more people are in your cafe, the more reputation you're building because they're going to tell their friends and so forth. And it feels as though today there's an us versus them mentality, and there always has been. The leaders and the people that are baristas or staff, and they nobody were enemies in a sense. So building trust through
Mhm.
these little communication moments feels like the biggest, most consequential time in our communication versus the staff meeting or the email that we send out. Do you feel like that's true? Have you seen that in other areas of business?
Certainly, there is that distinction. I think that that is true. What's internal versus external. I really encourage people to try to just be authentic in who they are and to prioritize all communication. Certainly, there are things that can be done and said that are internal, that
Hmm.
are appropriate there, that aren't necessarily appropriate externally. But many of us put an added pressure on ourselves in those circumstances. But you are certainly right that reputation matters a lot. And we should all be thinking about the reputation we have, especially as business owners. But that doesn't mean that we should stifle our communication and make what we do very rigid. We should have, I believe, some core values that we've thought about that are important to us, some boundaries around what we'll accept and what we won't accept that's tied to those values, and then communicate freely among them. Having boundaries and constraints actually frees things up. And that sounds really strange, but I'll give you a couple examples. In the world of improvisation, and most of your listeners are probably familiar with improv. People think it's just free form. People just do crazy things. They actually follow very strict rules. And it is those rules that allow them to have that freedom. So the rule everybody's most familiar with is yes and. When you do something, I respond, I take it on. So maybe it's a stage performance. You walk on and say, hi, Grandma. I don't look at you and say, I'm not Grandma, I'm Grandpa. I just become Grandma. I say yes and. That's a rule. The same thing is true in lots of other domains. As part of writing the book that I wrote on spontaneous speaking, I interviewed somebody who designs playgrounds, play structures for kids. And there was some fascinating research from a long time ago. This is what led me to talk to her, that said when you bring kids to an open field and you say play and you measure the quality of their play, the enjoyment, and then you bring a similar group of kids to a similar location, but it has a play structure in it. It turns out the kids play more creatively and freely when there's a play structure, which is a little counterintuitive. But in talking to this expert on playground design, it's because of the structure. The structure gives it a starting place, an ending place. If you don't have that, it feels uncomfortable. So having constraints, having structures, having boundaries we've set up, having values helps us negotiate that very issue you've talked about, and it helps us establish a reputation that we believe in and can support.
That's wonderful. So that our potential kind of coalesces around this little thing that it catalyzes the whole process, right? That's really interesting.
Absolutely. And it starts with just being able to respond to a question or make small talk in a way that we feel comfortable, but it ultimately cascades into our reputation, our authenticity. And that's why it's so important to think about these things.
Yeah. Okay, so that's naturally the next thing that we need to think about in my mind is thinking about how we do this. How do we keep track of our progress and
Mm.
consider is it at the end of the week? How did I communicate? What happened? How am I supposed to track my growth in this process?
I love the question. I love the question because it implies reflection. It implies planning. We need to understand that this is a process and it takes time, and it's in fits and starts. You might do really well at working on some skill like getting more confident, and then you hit a plateau and then you go some more. So the only way you get better at communication is the way you get better at anything. Three things: repetition, reflection, and feedback. So you have to get the reps in, you have to practice. Then you have to reflect. Many of us just are so glad to be done with whatever communication we had. We move beyond it. We don't think about it. Reflection is really important. Otherwise, we fall victim to that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So I'll give an example of what I do, and I do this religiously. At the end of every day, I spend 30 seconds and I think about what went well and what didn't go so well in my communication that day. And I tend to pick one thing, a strength and a thing to strengthen. And then every Sunday, I'll spend a little longer, 5-10 minutes or so, going through what I saw the week before, and I'll come up with a plan. I'll say, it looks like I'm not listening as well because I'm jumping in too soon. I'm seeing that trend. So this week, I'm going to work to listen a little more deeply and paraphrase before I give my response. So I give myself an action plan and then I try to put it into practice. And some weeks I do great, other weeks I don't do so well. But that's how I work to improve my communication. And then there's that last part. Remember, I said it's repetition, reflection, and then there's feedback. Trusted others. If you are a cafe owner, a coffee shop owner, some of your employees can be your best teachers. Ask them. Ask a trusted other. How did that go when I was giving the direction for the next week? Or how did you see that interaction I had with that person? What advice would you give me to improve? So repetition, reflection, feedback are the way we get better, and it's an active process.
An active process, yes. And you're not going to be great at it right away if I'm not practiced in recall. then I don't even know what I did today. I have to sit there and think about what I did, but I
Yeah.
imagine it'll unlock eventually.
Absolutely. It gets easier. I mean, paying attention to something you're not used to paying attention to is hard at first, but then it's quite obvious. I mean, we do this all the time with other people. We're constantly judging and evaluating other people's communication. We just have to turn that spotlight on us at the end of every day, not in the moment of doing it. That actually gets in the way of doing it well. But at the end of the day, think about, when I had that conversation with Chris, it went really well. And Chris does this really good job of pausing right before he speaks. I need to do that a little bit more, which, by the way, is true. You do a really nice job of that. So, noticing what I see in others can help me reflect what works and doesn't work for me.
That's interesting because a few days ago, I was reflecting on this. For not sounding derogatory, like chameleon can be a word that people use in a derogatory sense. Like I
Yes.
see somebody doing something, I read a book, and I'm like, that's a good idea. I think I'll integrate that. And then you can say, well, oh, I'm just doing that because they're doing it, and it's not authentic. But for some reason, I've said before that if I desire that or I'm attracted to that, then some part of me is wanting and is that is me, and that's the reason I'm resonating with it. So the fact that somebody gives me some inspiration based on their example or feedback isn't like against me. It's more of an enhancement of something that's already there by virtue of the fact that I want it or I'm attracted to it.
That's right. What draws us in, what things we like or things that repel us, like, oh, I really don't like, that gives us insight into ourselves. And
Mm.
that is authentic. That's it's helping us uncover something about ourselves. So we have to pay attention to that. The goal is not to be like somebody else or speak like somebody else, but it is to leverage some of the tools and techniques that they use in our own way to help us do better at whatever it is we're trying to improve.
If you could tell us here as we wrap up, I think one thing that we can start doing tomorrow that will put us on the journey to speak better, impromptu, on the spot, what would you wish everyone would do first?
Understand that we can get better. Many of us feel like we just don't have the gift of gab. That's not who I am. I'm an introvert, I'm shy, I'm nervous, and don't try to get better. So fundamentally, we can all improve. Even those of us who are good at it can get much better. We can hone and develop those skills. So that's number one. And then number two is to realize that through steady work and specific techniques, we can all improve. And I hope that in the work I do, the coaching, the teaching, the writing, the podcast hosting, that I provide some of those tools to people. And that's really my mission, is to help people hone and develop their communication.
Well, I think you've certainly done that today, and there's so much more to learn from what you've done and all of the platforms that you've created. So I would invite you to let us know how we can stay in touch
Mhm.
with your work and interact with all of these ideas.
Well, thank you. I'll very quickly run down a list of things. MattAbrahams.com is the source of everything. I have a whole bunch of resources. My new book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter, is about everything we've discussed today. I have a podcast all about communication, very short 20-minute episodes affiliated with Stanford's Business School. It's called Think Fast, Talk Smart. And then I'm a huge user of LinkedIn. And if that can be a way of connecting, I invite people to do it. So again, it's MattAbrahams.com, the podcast, the book, and LinkedIn.
Wonderful, Matt. This has been so rich and useful and inspiring. I really appreciate you being here on the show to help teach us how to do this. And lots of people are just going to get better very soon. So thank you,
Well,
Matt.
thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I enjoyed the conversation, and more importantly, I enjoyed learning from your communication style. You've got a very nice, easygoing style. Thank you, Chris.
All right, everybody. Well, what did you think? What was that like for you? I mean, just the idea of this kind of preparation for the lots of these little moments that come up in our cafes, in our coffee shops, where we are called upon to speak well, to articulate, to communicate effectively. Matt has done a masterful job, of course, at giving us a framework and some tools. There's way more to look at when you go to the website, mattabrahams.com. You can also get the book, and you should get the book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. And you can also listen to Matt. You just look up Matt Abrahams in speaking on Google, and you're going to come up with a lot of TED Talks and presentations on the subject. It is really good. And subscribe to the podcast also of the same name, Thinking Fast or Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast. And this is just going to be a great asset for you to encourage your managers and yourself to take advantage of all of these moments that in aggregate create an effective cafe, a great culture, and an overall wonderful staff experience for your baristas. And you're just going to enjoy the clarity you get from this as well. So a huge thank you to Matt Abrahams for being on the show. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with the Keys to the Shop audience. Again, you can subscribe to the podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. And yeah, if you have any questions from me, you have just to email me. Just go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback about today's episode, and also if you're interested in reaching out to me about key holder coaching groups, these mastermind sessions that are coming up in September. So space is limited, and I would love to have you put your application in or just have a conversation with me about this. If you're an existing cafe owner of a number of years and you want that community and fellowship and encouraging structured accountability that comes with a mastermind group like key holder coaching groups, then this might be for you. If you're just looking for a consultant or a coach to help your cafe or work with you one-on-one, this is what we do at Keys to the Shop. And I would love to consider that with you. Just email chris@keystotheshop.com. And one thing that is coming up that I'm really excited about is Coffee Fest. I was just talking to somebody today. I was having a discovery call, and the person was asking me, "Are you familiar with LA?" And I was like, yeah, actually, I am pretty familiar with it. I don't live there, but I go there enough with trade shows, and particularly with Coffee Fest. That's the next one coming up. I would encourage you to go to coffeefest.com and see what Coffee Fest is all about. I'll tell you, it's 30 years of providing what I think is probably the most bang for your buck, the most relevant and useful, practical, accessible content on running a great coffee shop out there. And I know that's saying a lot, but I've been with Coffee Fest now since 2004, and I'm still convinced that this is a great choice for you to make if you're looking to increase your knowledge and the resources that you have to succeed in coffee. So go and check them out at coffeefest.com. I speak at the shows all the time on leadership and cafe design and other great subjects like systems. And so if you go to coffeefest.com, register today and check it out. Say hi when you're in the area. Maybe come to one of my sessions while there at Coffee Fest. The next one after that's going to be in Minneapolis. So check out all the shows. I'm just a fan of Coffee Fest, and I think you will be too. Coffeefest.com. So that is it for today, everyone. I appreciate you. I really am humbled and honored that you would take the time to listen, and be sure to share these episodes. I think that's the best way to help Keys to the Shop put out the episodes on your timelines or your stories, and share on your social media platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram. You can connect with me, Chris DeFirio, at Chris DeFirio on LinkedIn. If you want to stay tuned on Instagram, it's just at Keys to the Shop, and that's it. So thanks, everyone. And as always, I do hope that today's episode has truly given you keys to the shop.